Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the August 2025 All Volunteer Huddle. This is a special huddle because we are kicking off the Congressional Fair Maps campaign. Um, it seems like if it seems like we've been doing this forever, that is because we have indeed been doing this forever. We first started going, you know, tilting at fair maps for this cycle. I don't mean all the redistricting efforts in the past, but I mean this cycle began in 2021. And in fact, we started trainings in 2020. So we've been at this, for a full 5 years or longer. But we are pleased to see everybody here. And here's a little preview of what we're going to be doing today. So we're actually going to begin. We've invited Anthony Gutierrez, who is Executive Director of Common Cause Texas, to join us. We are very pleased and grateful that he's here because, as you can imagine, he's a little busy right now with everything going on in Texas. And he's just going to give us an update on what is going on in Texas. And then we're going to just head right into what is happening in Ohio this year. What's our campaign going to be like? What's the timeline like? How are we going to engage? A big event that we're planning for next month. And then we want to talk to you about knowing your map and getting to be able to tell your story with a little bit of a Dave's Redistricting mini tutorial. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Catherine to introduce Anthony.
Well, one of the things that I always appreciate is the opportunity to talk to other Common Cause executive directors that are at the state level. Anthony has been with Common Cause Texas for 9 years, so he's coming up on a decade. And of course, as you can imagine, is facing an incredible amount of work. He has a background in all sorts of campaigning and communications, and I just want to let him know how much we appreciate. We know that you're a busy man, so a big thank you, and please jump on in, Anthony, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, sorry, a little slow on the mute button there. Hello everyone, hello from Texas. Thank you all so much for having me. And I feel like I should just start off by saying, like, on behalf of the many millions of Texans, probably the majority of Texans, like I'm just so sorry about what we're doing right now. Please just know that, Greg Abbott and what our governor is trying to do with the dictate he received from Trump, that the vast majority of Texans really just want to work on, flood mitigation and helping the families that were impacted by the July 4th tragedies and not be messing with any of this. But here we are. So sorry about what all is now being spread around the country because our governor just, did not have the integrity to say no when Trump asked him to deliver 5 congressional seats. But I have a really short, just kind of a little bit of a presentation, just kind of talking about kind of where we're at in Texas, what the defensive fight looks like that we are waging here, kind of the state of play, and I can go into a little bit of detail about like what we've seen in this process, what we saw with the map, the legislative process, because it does all very much seem like it's being coordinated by shadowy Republican figures in some place nationally. And I'm more than happy to hang out if anybody has like questions or things I don't touch on. I guess the place to start is just kind of the status of what's going on right now in Texas. Um, as you all are probably aware, Democrats in the state house, about 50 of them left the state 9 days ago to prevent the state house from having a quorum to be able to pass the maps in our 30-day special session, which is ending on this Friday. The governor has already said when we get to Friday, he's going to call a second special session that will also start Friday, which is so much fun. We all really need a break. Hopefully that's coming soon. We'll see. But it is unclear at the moment, like whether Democrats are going to be coming back for this second special session. I will say it it is probably likely at some point, based on the timeline of like, Texas elections and when like a final map would absolutely have to be passed and like how much leeway there is for the governor to just keep pushing the primary back and delaying it. Basically, if Democrats wanted to stay away, to just like completely kill the map and not allow it to be in place for this November election, they would have to stay out until like sometime next summer, which is really probably not a viable plan. Like there's probably going to be a map passed out of Texas at some point. So what we are doing at this point is really just trying to continue the defensive fight, and more than anything, setting things up for litigation, which I definitely talk to in a lot more detail. But that's kind of like where we're at right now. Everyone's just kind of waiting to see what happens Friday. Are people going to be coming back? Are they going to try to do another, limited sort of quorum break? But while that is sort of all playing out, there are obviously a number of us here in Texas, our partners, our legal partners, the Legal Women Voters in Texas, and many, many organizations plugged in here, are still very much engaged in this fight at the Capitol, like all of the time. For us, knowing that this was going to be something that was going to go to court, which our current maps are still being litigated, by the way. So that's a fun little twist on, the current court case, is that we're now about to have to litigate a second map. But knowing that it was going to be going to court, a lot of it right now is just testimony, making sure that we have huge crowds of people that are showing up every time there's a hearing, whether it's, a field hearing, which we had 6 of those before any maps were issued. And then once we got maps, there was on the House and Senate side, both of the appropriate committees had hearings where we were able to mobilize people, and obviously, I don't know if this would be the same case in Ohio, but in Texas, these committee hearings, these field hearings, they're always scheduled in a way where we get very little notice, and we're trying to mobilize people to show up, on a weekday in the middle of the work week, on pretty short notice, getting them to Austin, which is pretty far away from, the places that are most impacted by these maps, which are like, the Rio Grande Valley, that's 7 hours away, or Dallas Fort Worth, which is a good 4 hours away. But so far, I've been really successful getting people to show up, and I think probably one of the things that I think will ultimately be most effective is we were working really hard to just get people signed up for testimony trainings, and then working really closely with legal partners to make sure that we're getting the right points into testimony so that they're on the record, and courts will have things to look at. Things, have people talking about how communities of color are impacted and how they're no longer going to be able to elect their candidates of choice. In Texas, there's a really cute and incredibly evil trick that they've used before and are trying to use again to create what look like Hispanic majority districts that would be VRA compliant. But what they do is you sub in kind of low propensity Latinos for high propensity Latinos to make it look like it's a performing Hispanic opportunity district without it actually being one. It's a thing that courts objected to in the past, but that very much seems like what is happening here. I mean, beyond that, the defensive fight, I think here looks like what y'all have probably seen or probably experienced there as well. I mean, it's, all the rallies, all the protests, just like really trying to demonstrate the public outcry and the fact that people really, not only do they not want to do this, but they really want our legislature to be focusing on the things that Texans really do care about, the things like flood relief, which, there's so many poor families that are still waiting on relief that actually could have come from the governor just via executive order, before the special session even started. But I will not go down that tangent. The other big thing that we're working on right now, that you may have heard about, is there are some rallies happening this Saturday. These were originally kind of just like Texas centric rallies that we were going to do all over the state, and with House Democrats spread out in Chicago and Boston and California and all over the place. National interest just seems to be really sort of peaking. So we made the decision to kind of blow these up, see how many events we could get going around the country. And I was told this afternoon there's at least one event in almost all 50 states. get on the ball, New Mexico, which is incredibly exciting, I think. These, I think all of that, it really does serve to both highlight like the importance of the fight, the reasons people need to be engaged in this and show up to fight it. But also I do think this, the judges who will one day be litigating this see this stuff, pay attention to it, and it serves another purpose there. Okay, and then really quickly, I can just run through kind of like the map and sort of like some of the legislative pieces on this first slide here. So I mentioned we had a whole bunch of field hearings in advance of any map coming out, and we, like all of us who testified and the legislators who were on the appropriate committees, everyone was asking the committee chairs and the people who were expected to be the bill authors, who's actually drawing these maps, guys? Like, do you have a map in the works? And it was very clearly a concerted effort to not disclose where the maps were coming from. Ultimately, when maps were introduced, the two legislators in the Senate and the House who carried them just straight up admitted, like, we we did not draw these maps. These were given to us. The guy that gave them to him was the person there on the slide. His name's Adam Kincaid. He's the evil architect who runs the National Republican Redistricting Trust, and came up with some very creative, very legally dubious ways to just crack and pack districts across Texas to maximize Republican seats. And if you want to go to the next slide here, as far as like what, at a broad level, what would change in the proposed Texas map, they again, it's incredibly creative, and if it wasn't so evil, would be like kind of impressive. But what they did was just they broke apart majority minority districts in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Houston, and the Rio Grande Valley to create 5 new districts that probably will elect Republicans, certainly will not allow communities of color to elect their candidates of choice. And it really kind of wreaked havoc in a bunch of other ways, pairing lots of other Democratic members of Congress who we'll certainly be losing a great deal of seniority in Texas. So the next time there's a hurricane, for instance, or some kind of natural disaster, the seniority to like get federal resources moving is going to be a much harder lift. I mentioned the false majority Hispanic districts. That's definitely a thing that you will hear our governor talking a lot about, how they are creating these Hispanic districts that are going to elect Hispanic Republicans, and they're very proud of it. And that's what the Hispanic community in Texas really wants, which all a sham, very much just kind of like a smoke and mirrors trick that is going to just put the Hispanic communities in those districts in a position where they just don't get to elect their candidates of choice anymore. I think the other key piece here, the overt and brazen racial discrimination. This is a thing that I think, everyone everywhere who is working on redistricting is aware. Common Cause v. Rucho kind of opened the door for partisan gerrymandering. So the maps that we are looking at very clearly have been racially gerrymandered. They are cracking and packing communities of color all over the state. But if you watch any of the committee hearings, it's all about that they have some very, very simple talking points that allow them to talk about how they are doing this to create new Republican districts, not to do anything regarding race. To hear them talk, they drew these maps without even looking at any racial data, which, how you would do that is just a mystery. But we also know that they weren't actually the ones drawing the maps, the legislators who have been saying this. Then I think I have one more slide here. Oh, so this is just sort of, if you're familiar with Texas, this is kind of basically what they did here. It's a little hard to see, like, the Dallas area is up north, Houston's kind of southeast there. Those are kind of hard to see what they're doing, but the little pointy part at the very bottom, that's the Rio Grande Valley. That is, you'll see there's three bluish districts there. Those would all turn red. Those are the ones that you hear the governor talk about on TV, how they created Hispanic majority districts. And what they did there was, again, The reason there are these really tall, sort of meandering districts is the population centers are now up north, communities that absolutely are not going to share the same interests as the more Hispanic communities that are further south in the district. But and then briefly can just wrap up the key takeaways here. I mean, we do, mid-decade redistricting, for us anyway. It it is, I suppose, legal, but also just wrong, right? Like just not sort of a thing that you should be doing, and certainly not something, a talking point that the Democrats who left the state have been really hitting on is this is not something that people do when they're in power and they feel like their policies are being are popular. Like you don't need to adjust the game map if you sort of feel like you are doing good things for the people and people are really going to be supporting you. So that, is all just has been an incredible thing to witness, that it's sort of that they're undertaking this while at the same time saying people love their policies. Um, Again, it is a proposal that clearly is going to be racial gerrymandering under the guise of partisan gerrymandering. So we're going to have to sort of see how that plays out in the courts as well. But I guess the point to end on here is it does seem like the partisan gerrymander at play here, the partisan gerrymander, which is also racial gerrymander, and the way they're talking about it and trying to really just like crack down on like this is just a partisan thing, not a racial thing. It does seem like these guys know that they're pushing it too far. They know that in a fair court, this would never stand. Like the map would get stayed. The court at the very least would like tell them to go back and like do some redrawing. But I think Republicans in Texas realize they may not have to contend with a fair court. They may have the Supreme Court on their side in this, and I think they're trying to push as hard as they can that take all the legal barriers that sort of we know exist and just see like if we push it to the absolute limit, is the Supreme Court actually going to be a backstop, or are they just going to let us do whatever we want and open the door for every state to do whatever they want?
Yikes.
Which I feel like was a really downer note to end on. I really apologize for that, but I will say one thing that has been really amazing and inspiring to me is just we go through a lot of these fights in Texas, voter suppression bills, left and right, voter ID things, and redistricting fights like this, but people are really showing up in a way that we have not seen before. Just all over Texas, people are coming to rallies. People are just like driving across the state to come to these committee hearings. And it's really inspiring to see. If nothing else, I do think Texas Republicans are maybe making the best case anybody could ever make for why politicians shouldn't be in charge of this process and why we really do need just radical redistricting reform in this country.
Wow.
Okay, I feel like that was a little bit longer than I was supposed to be, but I'm I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything they'd like to ask about.
I think that that is a good note actually to end on, that this is an advertisement for why politicians should not be in charge. There was one question in the chat in the
I
Q&A,
think
which was
there are a
basically,
couple.
yeah, a couple, no, but the one I wanted to, that was about Texas specifically was, do you think that they're deliberately, is the Texas redistricting deliberately against the VRA to give SCOTUS a chance to weaken the VRA, was the question.
Yes, 100%. Yes, I think that's what they're doing. There's also, I mean, there is I wish I had our policy director, who's an actual lawyer, who could better answer the legal part of this. But this all kicked off with the Department of Justice writing a letter to our governor saying that there are 5 districts in Texas that are that they're coalition districts, and the Pettigrew decision, which was a case out of Galveston involving Commissioner Court map. They're saying that they said that like these coalition districts are not protected under the Voting Rights Act. But what the Department of Justice letter said was that these are illegal districts, which is not the same thing that the court said. But I think that's part of what the VRA challenge is here, that they're trying to set up. They're trying to say that the Texas Republicans are trying to say, we're breaking apart these coalition districts because the Department of Justice said they're illegal, even though Not what the court said, again. They're just not protected, but they're not like impermissible in any way. But I think, their play here is like, let's see if we break apart these districts, will anybody stop us, or will the court say that's fine? Since they're not protected, you can destroy them, dismantle them, do whatever you want, racially gerrymander it, and further weaken the VRA in doing so.
So I think one of the things that is a challenge for people is like racial gerrymandering versus partisan gerrymandering, and as how those two are connected. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I can, yeah, I can, I can a little bit. So I mean, and if y'all are familiar with the Common Cause Rucho decision, which you probably are, but I mean, what they basically said was they didn't even really say partisan gerrymandering is like okay. They just said it was not justiciable. They said it wasn't. The way I interpreted that was they were just saying like it's too hard to figure out like where that line is. Where is it too far to say this is partisan gerrymandering and this is not? We don't think we can find the standard, so we're just not going to rule on this. But they did still say racial gerrymandering is still, you can't do that. So in Texas, trying to that obviously is sort of the guys that they're trying to go with here, just trying to call it partisan gerrymandering. But the obvious sort of tell in Texas, I think this is probably the case everywhere, but like in Texas, we have precinct results reported down to the election results reported down to the precinct level, which is as granular as you can get using like Texas redistricting software to figure out how you're going to draw lines. We haven't done the whole analysis yet, but in the last round of redistricting, there were hundreds of precinct lines that are split, which you're only able to do if you're looking at racial data and not partisan data. And I'm sure that's going to, when we're able to do that analysis, that's going to be the case here, and there's going to be an obvious signal that there was this racial, that they were looking at the racial data in order to craft what they called a partisan gerrymander. But the question of whether or not whether or not the court's going to allow them to get away with it if they just keep saying partisan gerrymander over and over and over, even though they clearly had to have used some racial data in the crafting of the map. That's going to be the legal question that I think we
Yeah.
don't know the answer to today.
Well, Anthony, thank you so much. And my guess is we might have some other questions, so I will follow up with you if we do. And we're just really, really glad that you're here. And just so you know, we've been at this fight for a long time, and we feel your pain.
We do.
I really appreciate the invitation, and that, yeah, if there's anything that we can do from Texas to, lend sort of best practices and things, that please don't hesitate to ask. Would love to help. And again, so sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's not like he exported gerrymandering to Ohio. One of
No.
the things that's super clear is that we have good rules in the Ohio Constitution. Ohio voters came out and they supported reforms that were put in place in 2015 for state legislative redistricting reform, and then in 2018 for congressional redistricting reform. But unfortunately, the Ohio Redistricting Commission did not listen to us, and we just have been at this forever. So I think it's worth thinking about the fact that, we've been at this for 5 years, and the redistricting timeline is worth looking at. Like if you want to do a deep dive and you want to look at the court cases, that literally the 5 times that the Ohio Supreme Court sent them back to work on the state legislative maps, and twice for Congress. I'd encourage you, before we get going, to think about all of the things that we did together. And this time we're going to need to be even more creative. So I'm going to go through some basic things about the map making that's going to be happening this fall. So the way that this works is that we had the reform was a compromise. But one of the things that was included that I thought was interesting was that if you couldn't get a bipartisan map, 4 years later, you had to redraw it. And it was intended to say, hey, you want a 10-year map, Nobody likes uncertainty. Nobody likes maps that change. So in 4 years, you don't know who's going to be governor. You don't know who's going to be auditor. You don't know who's going to be secretary of state. So you're really taking a chance. Now, unfortunately, we've become more conservative. Ohio has no longer a bellwether state. So things are pretty much the same governor, same auditor, same secretary of state when it comes to um Ohio Redistricting Commission. I included in some of the resources the Legislative Service Commission documents, so you can kind of, if you're somebody who wants a deep dive, check that out. The thing to know as we think about the map making that is different is that we have a different court. Maureen O'Connor has moved on, and she was aged out as the chief, and we are heavily dominated by conservatives, and we know that some of those folks supported unconstitutional maps. They were in the minority, but they supported unconstitutional maps. So now we have a court that won't be, they're focused on proportionality. They're not going to be thinking about representational fairness. And so we're going into this not having that safeguard. Mia, next slide, please.
Catherine, could you just super briefly, could you explain why it is that why aren't we drawing legislative maps? Why are we only drawing congressional maps?
Okay, so it's important to remember that what happened is, we had state legislative maps that were drawn by the Ohio Redistricting Commission. And, they just go back to work and they make this little teeny weeny change, and then they make another little teeny weeny change. Once they got to the point that it was time for them to go back to work after that fifth map, they went back to work. At that point, the Democrats and the Republicans on the Ohio Redistricting Commission came together. They compromised and said, these will be nice districts for some of the incumbents. And that is why we're not going back and doing state legislative maps. Now, they knew, of course, that Citizens Not Politicians was going to be on the ballot at that point. But they came up with a compromise that worked for some incumbents, which is why we only have congressional. So this is a really simple way to look at it, and it seems complicated. The idea all along was, hey, we want to encourage bipartisan map making, but if we don't get there, what should we do? And so, the first stage, and ends the deadline September 30th, focuses on, all right, let's get a supermajority. Let's get lots and lots of people to support this at the State House with 50% of both political parties, both major political parties. Now, let's be honest, that's not likely to happen. And in fact, they might not actually even have a hearing in September. If you remember tactics from last time, they often basically wait until the very last minute to drop things. So then the next deadline, it goes over to the Ohio Redistricting Commission. It's important to remember governor, auditor, secretary of state, and then legislative appointees. In this case, to get a bipartisan map, they need 2 Democrats. There are only 2 Democrats on the Ohio Redistricting Commission. So essentially, to get a congressional map, they would need to get everybody to say, hey, this is good. So Halloween passes, we get into November. This is the last pass. And the last pass, they pass it as legislation. So it's just simply passed. Now, they do have more stringent rules that focus on keeping communities together. There's a very clear prohibition on partisan gerrymandering. And then they actually have to explain in writing why it is that they made the choices that they do. It's the kind of thing that should help with court cases, and it certainly did. So I think that that explanation, you know, often very convoluted explanations, but they were very helpful when it came time to go to court. It's also an opportunity for us to think about, well, what is it, you know, how is it that they justify things? How do we educate people about what gerrymandering is throughout this process? And then on to the next slide. It's important to realize as you're thinking about that timeline, you're saying, okay, so it goes, you know, starts out the legislature, and goes off to redistricting commission, and then it ends up going back to the legislature. If the map is passed, the new district lines are passed, in that last phase, it's just simple legislation, which can be referendum. Much like, you know, we are lucky we have direct democracy. We have the ability to collect signatures to change the Constitution. We also have the ability to essentially do a citizen's veto. And so the way to look at this is so many signatures, 6% of the last gubernatorial vote. So you're talking, you know, 248,000 signatures. And so way more signatures to make sure you actually get at that number of signatures from voters. It's a very tight deadline. They often, what happens is that there's a whole dragging of feet in the process of getting started. So you don't actually get 90 days. And so we know that this can be really, we do know that this can be really challenging. But this is an option. It's also important as we're thinking about the referendum that this is something that we used before in 2011. Now, you will notice what happened here. Chris Redfern was the head of the Ohio Democratic Party at that point. And he made, you know, he was saying, hey, let's get the Democrats. We're going to collect a bunch of signatures because this map is really ridiculous. And boy, was it ridiculous. I mean, all you have to do is look at the map on the left and it was totally crazy. And a referendum made sense. The thing to remember is this is signature collection essentially in winter. And what happened is that it was not a robust effort. And so they got together to compromise. And so in this case, you know, what we know from history is a compromise still has a snake on the lake. A compromise created what I would think of as an even more crazy duck district. So Jim Jordan's old district. So it's worth thinking about, like, what are the tools that we have? And with that, Mia, if you'll pass it to the next slide. I'm going to hand it off to Mia to talk about, okay, so I went through their timeline. It's time to talk about our timeline.
Yeah, so I mean, really, let's just think about this whole picture. So, we know they drew illegal maps. These maps, you know, went to the courts until there was, in the case of the Ohio House of Representatives and the Ohio Senate, there was a compromise of some sort. So they got a bipartisan map, and that is over. But congressional needs to be done again. But we know these folks and we know the court. And so we know on some kind of basic moral level, they got away with ignoring the rules in the Ohio Constitution. And they foisted these bad maps on us. And so they have kind of learned that they're able to do a thing, which is they're not really supposed to be allowed to do. And they're under pressure, just like Texas, um, and other Republican states are under pressure from President Trump to deliver more Republican districts. So we know going into this, we have 15 congressional seats in Ohio, and in a fair map divided how, you know, the state votes on statewide issues, it would be a 7-8 map or maybe a 6-9 map. Right now we have a 5-10 map. And, you know, these folks who are getting ready to draw these maps, they're not going into it going, okay, let's draw fair maps this time. They're going into it saying, you know, how many districts can we squeeze out here? And I just want to say one point that is kind of obvious, but you need to keep in mind there's a limit to how far you can push this. Because if you push this too far, you're going to get districts where it isn't really certain who's going to win, and you may end up with a bunch of toss-up districts. So whether it's Texas or Ohio, there's a limit to how far they can push their gerrymandering. So we're going into this timeline, and we're going to put up a robust opposition, but we are not we're not naive. We know what to expect, but that doesn't mean they're going to get to do their gerrymandering for free. They're going to have to pay for doing their gerrymandering, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows what are the good rules that are in the Constitution. How are they breaking those rules? What are good maps? What is gerrymandering? What is unfair? And we're going to fight for all those things, kind of regardless of whether we think that they're going to turn around and draw beautiful maps for us. But this is our timeline. So we're having our huddle today. We have a huddle each month. The September 10th is the September one, October 8th, November 12th. In September, we're also going to have our Fair Maps Day, and Elizabeth's going to tell you a little bit more about that later on. But it's going to be a big day to kind of kick off before they've put out maps or voted on anything. And the first deadline is there at the end of September. Then we have, and all during this time, we're going to have trainings. We're going to have trainings about how to use Dave's redistricting and testimony training. There will be hearings. We don't know exactly when there'll be hearings, but as soon as we know there are hearings, we'll make sure folks are ready. We'll make sure that there are letter to the editor trainings where people send letters in, and social media toolkits, and we'll have events. So all during this time, we'll be campaigning to make sure that everybody knows what is a good map, what is a bad map, what is in the Constitution, what is not in the Constitution, and what are these guys doing? So here we go. And it takes us to November 30th, which is the deadline for the whole, the final deadline for a map. And so we are going to need to keep the pressure on, and we will be kind of getting the gang back together. We saw in the chat that there's a lot of folks on here who have a lot of experience with fighting against gerrymandering and for fair maps in Ohio. So the question of, when are they going to start? This is sort of like what Anthony was saying in Texas. They claim not to have started on work, and yet there are drafts that are kind of floating around. So, either you're working or you aren't. In the Constitution, they are supposed to work together. They're supposed to work on maps together. It's not supposed to happen in secret in a bunker with, influence from just one party working together or even outside people. So we are extremely skeptical about the idea that they, are not starting already and don't know what it is that they want. And so I'm going to invite everyone here, Trevor, Elizabeth, Catherine, to join in. But, in terms of what is our campaign going to be, our campaign is going to be, we need folks, again, like what Anthony was saying, regardless of what we think they are going to do, we need to have strong citizen testimony that will put pressure on map makers. So the public needs to step up to hold the map makers accountable, make sure the public knows what gerrymandering is, and make sure that they can tell a story about their district and why it needs to be your community needs to be put together in a map, and what happens when you break your community apart, and whether that's telling your story with social media, with letter to the editor, with community events, through testimony, through making a map. All of these things are going to be incredibly important. Anyone else want to jump in on any of this?
I will have things to say about much of that shortly.
Okay, very good. All right. So, and then just in terms of, we will do more trainings about drawing maps and how to draw maps and everything. But just if you're looking for what a good congressional map should and could look like in Ohio, here are three sources. The Ohio Citizens Redistricting Commission was a project of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative and many other groups. Equal Districts came together and they drew a kind of a, like a example congressional map. And we had, Fair Districts had a mapping competition, and there were some great congressional maps that came out of that. And of course, there are notable maps in Dave's redistricting. So there's plenty of places to get started looking at good maps if that's, if that helps you to understand what a good map looks like.
And I was going to say, I think Greg Moore is on this Zoom right now
Yes.
with us, who was, one of the chairs of the Ohio Citizen Redistricting Commission. And they took a bunch of testimony and they really learned from people's stories, which I think there's a really good segue there. I also did, as we passed that picture of Sam Gresham, who passed last week, I just wanted to highlight, that we're missing him and that we're building on the legacy of others. I remember Sam, 20 years ago, all of the work he did, for years and years and years on redistricting reform. And so, yeah, with that, narratives,
Elizabeth, you're muted.
Like I've never done this before. Denise just said that this is her district, and I just said, I'm sorry, you have a lot of material to work with. As we were just saying, it's our job to talk about this. And so everyone here is an expert in redistricting, and we're all super passionate about it, and we could talk about it for hours. But we know that redistricting is not as well understood as we would like for it to be. And even when people have a baseline for understanding kind of the basic idea, for some, it is not the most riveting of subjects. Obviously, nerds, they're missing out. But for some people, hearing about the mechanics of how map drawing works or kind of the finer points of law, that's an effective way of understanding about this and engaging them. But I think, kind of as Mia was saying, one of the most effective ways to get people to understand just the true injustice of gerrymandering is to talk about the impacts that it has on people's lives. And as Mia was saying, that it's our job to be loud about this through testimony, through social media, through letters to the editor, talking to our friends and our communities, people in our lives about what this is about. And so that is about telling stories and trying to make it as personal, as visceral, about how kind of ugly and unfair, and sometimes just how stupid, how dumb, how silly gerrymandering is, and how it gets on us, how it lands on us in our life. Last year, we at the League, we worked with David Niven, Dr. Niven, who is a professor with the University of Cincinnati, and we worked with him on pulling some kind of vignettes out of District 6, which was at the time having a special election, to kind of illustrate some of the particular crazies of gerrymandering. So I wanted to share a few of these with you to kind of give you a sense of ways that you can talk about gerrymandering that can help people really kind of in their guts connect with how really just bonkers it can be. So the first one, so this is a map of District 6, and you can see how giant it is. So it goes basically like the entire eastern edge of Ohio. And it takes about 2.5 hours. It's about 151 miles to drive from one District 6 office to the other. So for the person who is the congressional representative of District 6, how much time do you think they have to spend in the car? How much time do you think that they can actually practically spend getting to know their community? They probably spend a lot of time in their car. not doing other things. And they probably can't actually spend that much time getting to know their community. And so no matter who represents that district, the distance makes meeting with constituents, attending civic meetings, business meetings, just getting to know the community that they're supposed to serve, almost impossible. And when districts are spread out like this, it means that even citizens who like and voted for their congressperson will never really be able to get their attention. And then you can kind of drive this home by saying, you know, if you've ever felt like politicians don't listen to you, hi, this is why. We can go to the next slide. This is one of my favorite graphics of this project. So this is the Tuscaroras County Strasburg Franklin Local School District. So they have 2 schools in this local school district. They have 1 elementary school and then 1 combined middle and high school. These 2 schools, which is an entire school district, are in 2 congressional districts. So this teeny little district is split between 2 districts, which, oh, does this mean that they get like an extra, rep? They have like twice as much representation? No, it means that their power is weaker as a group because it's been diluted. It means that they have 2 different bureaucracies, so more inefficiency, more wasted resources. They have 2 different funding allocations, so different funding cycles, different amounts of money. They have 2 different interpretations of the law, 2 different congressional offices trying to understand different ways of thinking about the same rules, which means ultimately different rules for people in the exact same community, different sets of priorities, and then maybe different ideas about how to use their resources. And the district is split because the district map was gerrymandered with the sole purpose of giving political advantage to politicians who were already in power. So not to benefit children or families or communities, but to benefit politicians. And we can go to the next one. This is our last one. So District 6 is so big that in one part of the state, the major employment is mining for fossil fuels. And then in the other part of the state, it's manufacturers whose focus is on green manufacturing and using fewer fossil fuels. So that means that there are competing economic agendas in the same district, which means that the interests that the representative is representing are whose exactly? They can't do both, right? So no matter who wins this election, there's just no one talented enough to be able to meet the needs of such a disparate economic climate. They even with the best of intentions, someone who is elected to serve an economic constituency like this on top of just the population constituency that has so many kind of on top of itself conflicts, is just going to fail. And so stories like this help people understand why gerrymandering hurts all of us so much. It's not an abstract thing. It's not something that like us, nerdy government people are whining about. It's something that has real world impact on all of our lives. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Catherine, I see you've been answering some of the questions in the Q&A. Are there some that you wanted to answer kind of to everyone? And you're muted.
I think there were a couple questions about like what can you referendum? So you can't referendum if the map is passed by the Ohio Redistricting Commission. You can't referendum if there's a supermajority map. So the only one that you can referendum is the one that would be passed by that November 30th deadline. So, state legislative, just as a simple, 50% bill. The other thing to remember, like in terms of differences for each of those stages, is that we're going into a time period where we will not be able to get public records from the state legislature, because you'll remember that in the budget, they changed the rules about getting public records and said, hey, we're exempting ourselves until the conclusion of the General Assembly. Now, that's really problematic when it comes to redistricting. But the thing to remember is we can get public records from the governor, auditor, secretary of state's office. So one of the things that we should be thinking about is making sure that we are getting the records we can right now. So there are folks that are getting records now for anything that's happening kind of behind the scenes with the state legislature. When that goes into effect in September, we will start really poking around and trying to get records from the Ohio Redistricting Commission. So those are the kinds of differences. There was also kind of questions about like a simple one that has to do with packing and cracking. And I think this is a natural one for Trevor to cover as he's talking about Dave's redistricting training. And with that, Trevor.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the one about the cracking and packing. But it, what I did want, what you can see evidence of cracking and packing and Dave's redistricting, and I'm loving Dave's redistricting, and I want to teach you folks how to, help create those stories and those narratives. Take a peek at your district, look at your communities, and help craft that narrative. And Dave's redistricting is like a perfect tool to do that. It's very user friendly. It's free. It's free. It's very easy to use. And some of the things you could do with it is just, it gets into great detail. You can go down to like street level, look at the street level of your community and see, demographics and the partisan leaning of, your district, your county, your city, your precinct, down to the census block level. All right. And you can view and compare past electoral results from statewide races over the last decade. And then you can use it to analyze these proposals and current maps and the proposals that are coming out to see how fair they are by 5 different metrics, standard redistricting criteria that is often used. And the best thing, if you're really into it, you can create your own maps. You can create your own districts. You can do full plans. You could create a full congressional plan, or you could just do a district. You could, create your own district, what your ideal district would look like. And you could even get smaller into, communities, like communities that you want to keep whole, neighboring communities, keep those together. All that fantastic stuff. So I'm going to switch over. I'm going to share my screen here. Oh, I need to request in. All right. Alrighty. Oops.
So
All right.
Yeah.
What are folks seeing?
I will stop sharing and you give it another try. We are, yeah.
All right. Can you see?
No.
Uh,
And we will be scheduling some trainings, some, Dave's trainings and things. So we'll definitely keep that in mind. Oh, you see Trevor's? Okay.
One's up.
Okay, great. I can't see it.
yeah.
All right.
Oh.
Yep. We are at 3 minutes to 7 though, just a heads up.
Well, I love that it's a teaser because it
Yeah.
gets you thinking about what you can
Yeah.
actually do.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll try and zip through this. So
Yeah.
if you davesredistricting.org, this is what you'll land on. You do not need an account to view any of these maps. You don't need to sign up if you don't want to, but it helps. You can get more into other, benefits of the application if you do create an account. All you need is an email and a password. Right, you put it right down in there and sign up. It's that easy. They don't share any information. They don't send me any emails. It's very nice, very easy. But you don't need an account. You'll just hit Ohio right there. Click in Ohio. Let's see. Wow.
Sometimes when you're on Zoom, it's a little slow. It'll come up.
All right. You see Ohio here?
Yep.
There we go. Ohio. This is where it'll drop you, and you'll have your congressional maps, your Senate maps, your House maps. We'll explore our current congressional maps, except, terms of agreement. And then here we go. Now, the first thing you want to look at are these overlays. You want to make sure this map toggle, this will pop up. It'll want you to create an account. Just dismiss that. Make sure that map is toggled on so you can see the background. And to help you see that background beneath those colors, you can bring this opacity down so you can get, see to street level there. All right, and then you'll have your district lines. You can switch to precinct lines, your county lines, your city lines. You got your labels over there. So you got your city labels, county labels. You can have all those on. All right, well, and then up here, we'll got our districts on, and up here next, we'll take a look at colors. And that's what's displayed here is your district colors. You could also look at partisan leaning. Now, this will give you the partisan lean of each district. And you'll see that on the right over here in that legend, whatever you're hovering over, whatever you have your cursor over, District 12 here, it'll give you your district information over there and your partisan leanings down there at the bottom. You could do demographics. This isn't really helpful when it comes to districts, but when you come down here to precincts and hit your demographics, then it'll bust these down into precincts. And you could see over there on the right again, toggle this, you hit this toggle, and it'll take you back and forth from districts to precincts. Then you could just toggle over that precinct, and it'll tell you there, over there on the right, your partisan lean and your demographic makeup of that precinct. It'll give you the precinct name right up there. Next, so this is your district selector. It basically will just give you the information. The information that is shown over here on the right will stay here, depending on what district you have selected. But again, that'll all show up on the right if you're hovering over there. You could change from district to county. So now you see over there, instead of district or precinct details, it's switched over to county. So you can get your county demographics, population, partisan leaning. You can get your city. If you look over there now, it's got Columbus, demographics, partisan leaning, precincts, again, hit those precinct lines. And then blocks. I saw somebody asking about like the lowest level that you can get down to for information. So if you see, when I hit that, it shattered into a few more smaller pieces. These are block details. So if you look over there on your right, this gets down to your neighborhood block. All right. Switch that back over to precinct. So the overall map statistics, now we'll look up here. You've got these statistics. This is the overall map statistics. It'll give you your districts there, population number, your partisan leanings, and then it'll break down demographics for you for each district there.
So I imagine there are a ton of people that are super excited about doing the trainings.
Yeah.
So one of the things I was going to highlight is that we are going to be sharing training information very soon. Any final words before we move on, since we're at 7:03?
I'm sorry, just one thing of this analyze button there is really nice too, because then it takes you to this quick analysis of the map on 5 different metrics that are pretty widely accepted. You got your minority representation, competitiveness, proportionality, splitting, and compactness, and then it breaks it down here into greater detail. All right, and you can compare maps. You can compare. Also, if you go into settings, right here, you'll get your data selector. You can compare different election data sets. All kinds of great stuff. Oh, and I just really quickly, if you go up here to this menu. Dave's has a library over here. If you hit the library, they have tutorial videos right here built into the website there. They've got, if you'll scroll, at the bottom is the first one you want. This welcome introduction, DRA in 6 minutes. It's got more detailed, specific trainings on like local redistricting, all kinds of great videos, articles, definitions. Very helpful tool. Love Dave's.
Wow. That is awesome. And I think, Trevor, when we do a training, you can assign folks some homework before they start, so that they can look at that the first intro video before they come to the training, and then they can kind of try it out themselves. And I think that's really useful. And what's interesting is that all of that was just about analyzing existing maps. So you can and have it analyze the existing congressional map that we're using. It can analyze, maps that were proposed, for example, our competition winners or other ones like that. And then there's, of course, drawing your own map, which is a whole other thing. So all of those are great things, and we will be sharing some training dates with you. Elizabeth, were you wanting to talk about Fair Maps Day?
I was wanting to talk about Fair Maps Day.
Awesome.
We are getting the band back together. Mosey, exactly. We are going to get to see each other again, I hope many of us, on the 17th, which is also Constitution Day, in Columbus, across the street from the State House, at the Episcopal Church. We are going to be meeting from 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. We're going to start with games, fun things. We'll have a press conference. We'll have lots of inspirational speakers. We'll do a march around the State House. It'll be a good time. We will really love seeing you. And it's really just a show of force. We are here to say, like we aren't going anywhere. We are here. Y'all think you did something last year? We are not going anywhere. So
Absolutely.
looking forward to seeing many of you on the 17th.
And Mosey had a great idea too, which was a Fair Maps Day in place. Maybe we wouldn't do it on the same day, but I really love that idea. I think a lot of the protests that have really taken off, since January have been the ones where we're not necessarily trying to get everybody in the same place at once, but we're trying to get as many people in their community to be visible as possible. So I think we'll have the Fair Maps Day in Columbus on the 17th, and maybe we'll have another event, maybe in October, say, where we encourage as many different gatherings in as many places across the state, in your community, in your neighborhood, show up for Fair Maps. We wanted to just also mention the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition Election Protection Summit that's on September 20th. I think we will send some information out about that in our follow-up. 2 important things happening in September. And then this is just a chance for all of you to look at pictures of yourself when you were young and optimistic. Here we all are fighting that good fight. I see Trevor. I see myself. I see a bunch of people who are on this call. Like Elizabeth said, we know the deal, but we are still here and we are not going to let them get away with stealing our votes and stealing, our fair districts without a big fight. So that is what we are here for. And thank you so much, everybody. And anybody want to say last words?
I just know that I love how we're still together in community. The most persistent people I know are redistricting reformers. We think in terms of decades, we're focused on the voters, and I'm just really glad we're together in this really big fight. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. I notice a persistent as AF. I just, wanted to say a great big thank you. We'll send you materials and we need your ideas. So as we were going through all of this, if you have creative ideas, please let us know. We need your ideas. We need to be thinking about how we can do this so it is different, powerful, and an educational opportunity for the public. So they
right.
actually understand what partisan gerrymandering is.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Be well. Thanks.